Dr. Elias Warren had spent the better part of 12 years studying Earth. Not as a tourist, not as a casual observer, but as a xenoanthropologist sanctioned by the Grand Council of the Assembly to live among humans and understand their culture. He had traveled through bustling cities, quiet rural towns, even war-torn regions where flags changed but grit remained the same. He had written volumes of reports, and in each one, the warning was clear. Do not provoke them. He'd said it in every way he could. Do not attempt occupation. Do not attempt subjugation. Do not mistake patience for weakness. His peers laughed in the assembly chamber. They called his field work emotional contamination. They said he'd gone native. They said humans were slow, scattered, and primitive compared to the might of the Archon Dominion and its allies. And yet, Elias knew something they didn't. He'd seen a human mother pull her child from a burning building while the ceiling collapsed around her. He'd seen miners in West Virginia dig for days to rescue a man they didn't know. He'd seen soldiers, underpaid and exhausted, improvise defenses out of farm equipment that held off a trained militia. Humans, when pressed, didn't simply break. They bent, and then they struck back harder. When the assembly gathered in the great silver hall above the Argoth Nebula, Elias spoke for the last time. You think conquest will be quick, he told them, his voice echoing. It won't be. They'll make you bleed for every step you take. And when they adapt to you, and they will, you'll be the ones pleading for surrender. The hall was silent for 3 seconds. Then the laughter began. 2 months later, the invasion fleet was launched. The first ships arrived over Earth without ceremony. No grand announcement, no warning, just a sudden shadow blotting out the sun above dozens of major cities. New York, Tokyo, London, Cairo. The Archon Dominion's fleet hung in the atmosphere like an executioner's blade. Their landing craft descended in dark columns, each one carrying shock troopers bred for war. The Assembly's military doctrine was simple: overwhelm, intimidate, and dominate before the enemy could organize. It should have worked. It had worked on countless other worlds. But Earth was different. In New York, they expected panic. They got it for about 2 minutes. Then the screaming turned into shouting, and the shouting turned into something else. Barricades went up. Civilians started hauling water and food into subway tunnels. Police officers began directing traffic not away from the enemy, but toward strategic choke points. In Tokyo, entire apartment blocks went dark at once, residents cutting power to avoid drone targeting. In Nairobi, truck drivers used their rigs to block every road into the city center. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. The Archons underestimated instinct. They mistook it for chaos. By the 3rd day, their easy march had slowed. Patrols that should have been safe were ambushed in alleyways. Sniper fire came from rooftops. In some areas, the enemy wasn't even visible, just sudden explosions, sabotage, and stolen supplies. The Archons adapted by increasing brutality. Hostage executions, random airstrikes, burning whole neighborhoods to smoke out resistance. It had the opposite effect. Elias Warren watched from a hidden human safe house in Chicago. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd been recalled before the invasion, but he stayed. He knew what was coming. He saw the way humans looked at the occupiers, not with fear, but with calculation. He knew they were already learning the enemy's weaknesses. And then came the first big blow. In Lagos, a squad of Archon soldiers disappeared. No trace, no comms. 3 days later, their armor was found mounted on a wall above a crowded market. It was a message. The Assembly's War Council dismissed it as a small act of defiance. Elias knew better. He'd seen it before. The first sign that the prey had decided to hunt. It began as whispers in the dark. Small pockets of resistance were starting to share information. not through high-tech encryption, not through orbital relays, through scraps of paper, through handwritten notes tucked into grocery bags, through coded phrases slipped into casual conversation in public markets. The Archons had scanners for every frequency, but they didn't have a way to listen to a grandmother in Detroit telling her neighbor that the tomatoes are ripe early this year, which really meant the convoy passes on Wednesday. Get ready. Humans weren't stronger, weren't faster, but they had something the assembly never understood. They could learn at a frightening speed, and when they learned, I didn't follow rules. By the second week, the resistance wasn't just random civilians. Disbanded police units reformed into hit squads. Firefighters became logistics officers, using their knowledge of city layouts to move supplies without detection. Amateur drone hobbyists started modifying commercial quadcopters into bomb carriers. Farmers in Kansas were melting down scrap metal to make shrapnel. Elias Warren kept moving, never staying in one safe house more than 2 nights. He watched it spread like a fever. In Boston, fishermen started sabotaging Archon patrol boats with fishing nets. In Berlin, graffiti artists marked safe houses with a symbol only resistance members understood. In Rio de Janeiro, entire gangs joined the fight, not for patriotism, but because occupation threatened their own survival. Motivation didn't matter. Results did. The Archons responded with heavier armor. Armored walkers stalked city streets. Supply drones flew constant surveillance routes. Public executions became routine. And yet it didn't stop. A turning point came in Manila. An Archon transport was ambushed on a narrow bridge. Homemade explosives took out the lead and rear vehicles, trapping the convoy. The survivors tried to fight. The resistance didn't try to capture them. They didn't even kill them all in the fight. They took them, alive. And the next week, videos appeared across the underground human network, showing those same Archons being interrogated in their own language. The questions weren't about troop movements or strategy. They were about how the weapons worked, how the armor sealed, what fuel the walkers used. That was when Elias knew the war had shifted. Humans weren't just surviving anymore. They were dissecting their enemy, piece by piece, learning, adjusting, adapting faster than the Archons could keep up. It was exactly what he had warned the assembly about. And now, it was too late for them to stop it. By the 4th week of the invasion, humanity stopped waiting. They didn't just defend, they hunted, and they did it with a creativity the Archons couldn't anticipate. Elias Warren moved through the ruins of Detroit, a city half destroyed but alive with human ingenuity. What the Archons thought were debris fields and abandoned buildings were actually fortresses. Underground tunnels connected entire neighborhoods. Every block had traps, pressure plates rigged to scrap explosives, rooftops rigged to collapse under heavy walkers, and old subway lines converted into kill zones. The Archons had one rule: superior firepower wins. Humans had one rule: don't fight their way, fight ours. It started small. Armored drones hit by homemade EMP bursts. Patrolling squads lured into alleyways, only to find barricades of overturned vehicles and spiked metal hidden in trash piles. Supply convoys ambushed in forests. And when soldiers thought they were safe, nets fell from trees, entangling walkers while nearby humans poured fire from rooftops. Elias watched one skirmish from a distance in St. Louis. 10 Archons, clad in heavy exosuits, moved down a wide street. 2 minutes later, only 3 walked out. The rest had been trapped in improvised pits, covered by sharp stakes and electrified wires. The human attackers weren't even visible. And then came the innovation. In Philadelphia, a team of engineers had reverse-engineered Archon energy rifles. They didn't fully understand them, but they understood enough to make countermeasures. Street lamps converted into laser reflectors, sending energy beams back at drones. Rainwater mixed with metal filings became conductive traps for armored walkers. Entire city blocks became death mazes, and humans thrived in them. They laughed as the Archons fell. They shouted in joy when a drone's control systems fried. The Archons tried to adapt, sending larger squads, bigger weapons. They burned forests, flattened towns, tried to crush morale with sheer destruction. But humans adapted faster than they could destroy. Each loss became a lesson. Every failure became a weapon. Elias walked past one battlefield littered with alien bodies. He counted 10 different human innovations used in that single engagement. 10 ways the humans had turned the Archons' own strength against them. And he realized something terrifying for the assembly. Humans didn't just fight back. They evolved while fighting. By now, the aliens weren't just cautious. They were terrified, and the humans knew it. For the first time in history, a species that had been underestimated had gained the upper hand. Humans weren't just fighting anymore. They were forging themselves into something else. Something the Archons couldn't predict. In the ruins of Chicago, Elias Warren walked past survivors who had turned factories into workshops. Steel beams were reshaped into armor-piercing traps. Conveyor belts moved explosives into hidden caches. Engineers rewired abandoned power grids to overload the Archon energy shields. Kids who had once played video games were now hacking drones mid-flight, rerouting their control signals. Humans had turned desperation into genius. By this time, news of Earth's resistance had spread across the globe. Small groups who had never met were now synchronizing attacks. In the Amazon, tribes who had been ignored for centuries struck supply lines with deadly precision. In Moscow, urban survivalists used old Soviet bunkers as command centers, directing counterstrikes with scavenged technology. Every victory fueled the next. Every defeat taught a lesson. The Archons tried to maintain order. They attempted mass arrests, mass bombings, and even biological attacks. None of it worked. Humans adapted, always one step ahead. Masks, filters, underground tunnels, improvised medical treatments. Nothing could be imposed that humans hadn't already thought to counter. Elias watched a coordinated attack in Paris. 5 city blocks had been rigged with pressure-sensitive explosives. Drones were rerouted into traps. Streets were filled with barricades of burning vehicles. And humans, ordinary humans, led it like a symphony. The Archon's superior firepower did not matter. Every strike was anticipated, every move countered. And then came the ingenuity that truly shocked Elias. In New Delhi, human scientists captured a small Archon drone and dissected it in a makeshift lab. They didn't just destroy it, they improved it. They added better sensors, better flight control, and then launched it back at the invaders. That single drone turned the tide in 3 key battles that week. The Archons couldn't understand it. Every weapon they deployed seemed to work against them within hours. Elias walked among the survivors and realized the truth. Humans weren't just surviving. They were shaping themselves into a weapon. Fear did not bind them. Desperation did not cripple them. Every loss became innovation. Every attack became experience. By the 6th week of the invasion, whispers among Archon troops changed. They spoke in hushed tones about the species that adapts too fast, about the prey that fights like a predator. Fear replaced arrogance. The invaders who once expected submission were now pleading for distance, for mercy, for survival. And Elias knew it. The humans were only just beginning. By the 7th week, Earth was no longer a passive battlefield. It had become a forge, a machine of retaliation that the Archons couldn't comprehend. Cities that had been bombed into rubble were now hubs of resistance. Each street had become a gauntlet. Each alley a trap. Humans weren't just defending, they were pushing forward. Elias Warren traveled with a small team through what used to be Los Angeles. Skyscrapers had become watchtowers. Underground subway tunnels were repurposed into transport lines for supplies and fighters. Drones monitored the skies, not just to warn of enemy attacks, but to strike first. Humans had learned that mercy in war is a weakness, and humans did not show weakness. The Archon's command was in chaos. Supply lines collapsed. Reinforcements vanished in forests, deserts, and city streets. Entire squads of their best soldiers were wiped out by improvised weapons. Sometimes nothing more than a cleverly rigged fire hydrant or a rain-slicked road leading to a pit of sharpened steel. Every move they made was anticipated, every advantage nullified. Elias watched one battle from a rooftop in downtown LA. An Archon battalion tried to storm a human stronghold. At first, it seemed unstoppable. Walkers moved down the streets, drones hovered above, laser fire cut through concrete. Then humans activated their trap networks. Streets exploded with controlled demolitions. Electrical grids shorted, sending energy pulses into armored suits. Drones turned against their masters. By the end, not one Archon survived the encounter. And yet, the humans did not gloat. They did not linger. They moved to the next threat. Their minds had hardened into something Elias had never seen. Efficiency without mercy. Precision without hesitation. In New York, engineers had modified captured Archon ships to fire on their own fleets. Entire invasion columns were destroyed before they even touched land. In London, civilians who had never held a rifle became expert marksmen, trained overnight in guerrilla warfare. In Beijing, factories were repurposed to produce weapons in days, not months. The human capacity to innovate while fighting was staggering, and the Archons began to plead, not in messages, not in subtle communication, but in surrender. Small envoys, unarmed, approached human positions begging for negotiation. The Assembly's fleet, once supreme, now hovered uncertainly above Earth's atmosphere, watching battles unfold with growing dread. Every human victory shattered their confidence. Every human innovation reminded them they had underestimated their opponent. Elias knew that Earth had crossed a threshold. Humans weren't just defending a planet anymore. They were redefining what it meant to be a species capable of survival, adaptation, and conquest when cornered. Mercy was not an option, and the invaders were learning, far too late, that Earth would never bow. By the 8th week of the invasion, the humans weren't reacting anymore. They were dictating the battlefield. The Archons had once believed Earth would break in days. Weeks in, they realized they were bleeding, and humanity wasn't just holding, it was striking. In the ruins of Tokyo, Elias Warren watched massive coordinated strikes unfold. Drones, once tools of the invaders, now buzzed overhead with human markings, dropping modified explosives on Archon armor columns. Streets were lined with improvised barriers, camouflaged pits, and hidden launchers. Every neighborhood became a fortress. Every rooftop a sniper post. Humans had taken the landscape itself and turned it into a weapon. The Archons responded with overwhelming force. Ships descended in swarms. Walkers trampled through streets. Lasers carved through concrete. And humans adapted. In Osaka, civilians had rerouted the city's water system to flood streets at precise intervals, shorting armored walkers and creating channels that funneled enemies into kill zones. In Rio, captured Archon shields were repurposed to protect key strongholds. In Moscow, underground tunnels collapsed on invading troops at exact moments, cutting off their retreat. Elias moved with a small human strike team. They weren't professional soldiers in the conventional sense. Teachers, engineers, mechanics, students, all had become lethal instruments of war. Their strength wasn't just weapons. It was strategy, improvisation, and the relentless refusal to die. The turning point came when humans captured an Archon command ship in orbit. Engineers and hackers, working together, infiltrated the ship's systems. They didn't just disable weapons. They sent coordinates back to Earth for a concentrated orbital strike. In one brutal sweep, an entire fleet of Archons was decimated before it could even land. Across the planet, the psychological effect was immediate. Morale collapsed. The invaders who had once laughed at humanity now fled at the first sign of resistance. Smaller detachments surrendered en masse. Entire battalions, terrified of the humans' ingenuity, refused to engage. And whispers spread in the assembly. Humans are not just survivors. They are hunters. Elias Warren knew it was more than luck. It was evolution. The species that had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed had learned, adapted, and weaponized its very existence. Humans were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were teaching a lesson to a species that thought conquest was easy. And as Earth's skies glowed with the destruction of Archon fleets, a single truth became clear. The tide had turned. The hunters were now the hunted. By the 9th week, the Archons no longer controlled the battlefield. They were running from it. Earth had become a crucible, and humans were the fire. Elias Warren moved through the wreckage of what had once been London. Streets that had been bombed into rubble were now forward operating bases. Humans had mapped every inch of the city, turning ruins into defensive and offensive positions. Supply chains ran underground. Communication lines were improvised but unbreakable. Every street, every building, every alley was a weapon in itself. The Archons tried one last desperate measure. They mobilized orbital bombardments, unleashing swarms of ships to strike the largest human strongholds. The skies burned and the ground shook, but humans didn't scatter. They adapted. Using captured Archon targeting systems, they rerouted missiles into the ocean. Energy beams from the invaders' own ships were reflected back with improvised mirrors. Entire fleets were destroyed by their own fire. Elias watched as humans launched surgical strikes against remaining Archon positions. Teams of engineers, soldiers, and civilians infiltrated supply depots and command centers. Cities became interconnected networks of ambushes, traps, and counterattacks. It was no longer war, it was a hunt. The psychological effect on the invaders was devastating. Entire squads surrendered without a fight. Envoys approached human leaders, trembling, begging for negotiation. "We will comply," they said. We cannot fight anymore." The Archons who had once laughed at Earth now cowered. Humans did not grant mercy lightly. Elias Warren witnessed what no xenoanthropologist had ever seen. A species that had been underestimated, mocked, and nearly enslaved, now deciding how justice would be served. In New York, captured Archons were paraded through the streets, not as trophies, but as warnings. Messages were sent across the globe. Humans will not be subjugated. Resistance had become retaliation. Survival had become dominance. And the Archons, those proud invaders, were learning the cost of underestimation. Elias felt a chill. He had warned the assembly months ago. Now, he was witnessing the aftermath, the full reckoning of a species that had ignored his words. Humans were no longer a challenge. Humans were the masters of their own destiny. And any alien foolish enough to try conquest again would face the same fate. The galaxy would remember this day. By the 10th week of the invasion, the Archons were shadows of their former might. Their fleets were shattered, their armies decimated, their morale in ruins. Entire battle-hardened divisions refused to engage, retreating to isolated positions and pleading for mercy. The Assembly's grand strategy had failed spectacularly. Humans had turned every disadvantage into an advantage, every weakness into a trap. Elias Warren moved with a human strike force in what had been Moscow. Snow-covered streets hid improvised traps. Buildings had been rigged to collapse on armored walkers. Drones, modified with Archon tech, flew overhead, guided by human operators to deliver precise strikes. Supply depots were targeted not to destroy, but to turn ammunition and fuel captured and redirected into human hands. The Archon's last attempt at a counteroffensive was bold but naive. A massive landing force was sent to reclaim New York. Hundreds of armored walkers, aerial drones, and energy weapons descended in a synchronized strike. The humans didn't panic. They did not scatter. They had learned patience, observation, and improvisation in ways the invaders could never anticipate. It began slowly. Streets flooded, collapsing under the weight of armored walkers. Hidden nets and pit traps immobilized vehicles. Energy pulses shorted out drones before they could strike. Humans fought in squads, blending engineers, civilians, and soldiers, using a combination of brute force and cunning strategy. Archons fell in record numbers, their fears spreading like wildfire through the ranks. Elias watched as the remaining Archons sent unarmed envoys to plead for ceasefire. Entire battalions surrendered without firing a single shot. Communications from orbit indicated a fleet of Archon ships hovering near Earth was abandoning the invasion altogether. They were retreating, broken, and humiliated. Humans did not celebrate immediately. They were not reckless. Every captured weapon was studied, every fallen enemy examined. Humanity had learned not just to survive, but to dominate. Their ingenuity had turned desperation into a weapon more lethal than any Archon technology. The Archons who once thought themselves superior were now begging for mercy. They understood, finally, what Elias had warned the Assembly months ago. Humans were not predictable. Humans did not submit. Humans adapted, learned, and retaliated in ways no invader had ever imagined. Elias looked across the battlefield, a mix of ruined cities and thriving human strongholds. He felt pride, exhaustion, and something darker, awe. A species that had been underestimated, mocked, and almost conquered had risen. And the galaxy would remember the lesson. Earth's inhabitants were not prey. They were predators. The last of the Archon forces had gathered near what remained of their forward command stations above Earth. Shattered fleets orbited aimlessly, their once mighty ships scarred and burning. Entire battalions of troops had surrendered. The galaxy's proudest warriors were reduced to trembling shadows, begging for clemency from a species they had thought primitive. Elias Warren watched from a high ridge overlooking the ruins of San Francisco. Humans moved with precision, even in destruction. Engineers reinforced captured vehicles, civilians transported weapons, and soldiers coordinated strikes across miles of terrain. Every human on the battlefield had become a force of adaptability, innovation, and brutal efficiency. The Archons sent envoys, unarmed. Their voices quivered. Please spare us. We submit. We only sought conquest. Elias knew humans would not answer with mercy. Mercy was weakness. Mercy had cost countless worlds before. Humans had learned that. They had survived fire, hunger, invasion, and arrogance. They had adapted while fighting. They had learned while dying. And now, they would finish what had begun. Human engineers rigged the remaining Archon ships to crash safely away from population centers, while simultaneously neutralizing their weapons. Ground forces corralled surviving soldiers into containment zones. No one escaped, but no unnecessary slaughter occurred. Humans weren't cruel, they were deliberate. Every move was calculated, every strike intentional. Humans did not destroy for pleasure. They destroyed because survival demanded it. By the end of the campaign, the Archons were utterly broken. Entire fleets annihilated, commanders captured, colonies abandoned. Humiliation carved deep into their history. And yet, humans didn't stop at victory. They left a warning. Broadcasts across Archon networks replayed human ingenuity, resilience, and refusal to bow. The message was simple: never underestimate Earth. Never challenge humanity. Elias Warren walked among the survivors, both human and Archon. Humans rebuilt, repurposed, and documented. Every fallen enemy became a lesson, every battle a blueprint. Humanity had emerged not just victorious, but transcendent in its determination and adaptability. For the first time in history, a species that had been underestimated, mocked, and nearly enslaved had risen to redefine the rules of survival in the galaxy. The Archons would tell their descendants, Earth is different. Humanity cannot be broken. Humanity will fight, adapt, and dominate. Elias looked at the horizon. Cities in flames, in reconstruction, engineers moving among ruins, children learning to hack drones as a form of play. Humans were alive, unstoppable, and untouchable. And for once, he smiled. The assembly had been wrong. Humans were not just survivors. They were predators. They were innovators. They were the species no one would ever forget, and the galaxy would remember. Earth had spoken, and mercy was for the weak.